We have here in studio Simiyu Werunga, security analyst. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.
So obviously a string of threats that the African continent is facing this year. What do you make of this assessment?
I think that is a true situation of what we are encountering as a continent. We seem to see a lot of confidence in the Boko Haram in Nigeria, although the government is working very hard to deal with that. We don't seem to have dealt a major blow to the Maghreb problem in northern Mali, and Al-Shabaab seems to be playing games around this region. So when you look at it in totality, I think Africa, as much as we've been trying to work together as a continent to harmonize what we are doing to deal with terrorism, to share information and intelligence in what we are doing, I think that terrorism still poses a major threat on this continent. And from my own view, I think this is a true reflection of what this continent is facing. And just to add on that, I think it's also incumbent now upon the African continent leadership to relook at how they are dealing with terrorism on the continent so that we take charge of our own problems.
And just speaking of that, relooking at how we can counter terrorism in the continent, what are some of the measures that governments in Africa can take?
I think one of the best things I'm seeing now in Africa is governments are coming out very quickly to warn their people about impending threats. And we speak from some informed perspective that we see our African governments coming up with very strong mechanisms of monitoring terrorism and other security threats that are transnational in nature. So that is one. Number two, I think most African countries have never taken seriously making sure that their strategic installations are secured. And thirdly, we don't seem to have taken care of our vital installations. We see this building up on the African continent, and it's a good sign because I'll give you an example. If you have a power station that has not been secured for a while and it can give that country 40 to 50% of power, that to us was a major lapse on the part of the African continent governments. But we are seeing that. So one, alert the people in advance, which they are now doing slowly. Secondly, we are seeing African governments taking care of their strategic installations, making sure they're secured, enhancing the capacity of the forces to secure them, and buying equipment that will be adequate to securing those strategic installations. And thirdly, ensuring that our vital installations are also secured. So those three put together, and then finally ensuring that you share information amongst governments in the region, for example, into blocks, then at the continent level, will ensure that Africa as a continent takes care of its own security problems. And we are seeing a trend towards that. And then lastly, I think on that one, we saw in Addis Ababa the urgency of ensuring that the standby brigades have been put in place. That to us is a major development. If it's going to happen next year the way they are saying, then I think as Africa will be starting from a very strong foundation of dealing with security threats on the continent.
Right, but there's also the issue of porous borders, which is quite common right across the continent. And one would wonder why it's so difficult for a government to send security personnel to man these porous borders.
Because one thing you need to understand that our borders were artificial in the first place. So we have a tribe across borders, and even if you send your people or your military across to man those borders, we still have our families across borders. And this is evidence all over the continent. So it becomes very difficult, for example, for the Kenyan government to send troops on the border of Kenya and Somalia. Yet we have a homogeneous community that straddles across the borders. In Europe, we know it's been very systematic the way they came up with their borders. So in Africa, it becomes a bit of a problem because of our communities and socialization as a people. So even if you took troops to your borders, and you want to stop a cousin from visiting a cousin across the border, it becomes difficult. So what we are saying is African countries, and I'll take for example the Kenyan system, that are coming up with this idea of Kenyan people themselves participating in their own security and augmenting what the government is putting in place. So if we started from that, ensuring their people get involved in securing themselves, then augment government efforts to secure the country, that will be the starting block for a better security for our continent. But it's very difficult on the African continent to send troops to man our borders because you'll be fighting brothers and cousins and uncles and mothers. So that, to me, is a major problem that Africa might not be able to deal with now until we start getting their own people, each country, to ensure that they start participating make them understand why it is crucial for them to ensure their locality is safe, their country is safe. And once you build that confidence in the people, then it will be very easy for the continent to start taking care of its own problems.
Right. We have to leave it there for now. Thanks very much for those insights. Simiyu Werunga speaking to us here live in studio.